Hello and welcome to today's reading of D-Day Dog. Now Finn is very tired today, aren't you, Finn? Eh? Because he's been for a fell run, he's a very sleepy boy. But we're still going to read it because being read a story when you sleep is a nice thing as well, isn't it? Chapter 5. You ready? Right. Here goes. Where shall I hold it? I'll hold it about here. So, we've learned that D-Day was the biggest seaborne military invasion ever. Thousands of men dropping out of planes, tens of thousands coming from ships onto beaches. But why? Mr. Saller asked. Why did they do it? All the blinds were drawn in 6A's classroom, the sun already overheating 30 children just back from the Easter holidays. 2 electric fans were humming at the back of the room. Jack sat where he always sat, with Lucas and Lucas's support teacher, Miss Khan. Jack and Lucas were best friends, and they had been since nursery. Lucas insisted that Jack sit with him, and that was fine with Jack. Lucas struggled a bit with school and with some of the other children, but together Jack and Miss Khan made sure that Lucas could cope. Miss Khan called them Team Lucas. There was so much of a team that when his dad got Jack a camouflage pencil case, Lucas wasn't happy until he had one of his own. So now they had matching military pencil cases, and Jack and Lucas loved playing war games together, often connecting online over their PlayStations after school. You awake? You are just, aren't you? Mr. Saller repeated his question. Hands up. Who can remember why the Allies invaded France on D-Day? To beat the Germans, Grace Yaboa replied. Correct, Mr. Saller said. But what were the Germans doing that we didn't like? Had they invaded France and other countries? Asma Malik asked. Yes, and they were doing the Holocaust and killing lots of people, Grace added. Yes, Mr. Saller said. Very good. Jack had his hand up almost constantly as Grace and Asma answered Mr. Saller's questions, but his teacher had overlooked him so far. And what do you think the Allies did to prepare for the assault? Mr. Saller asked. Jack stared hard into Mr. Saller's eyes now, like Finn stared into his eyes when he wanted something. He knew the answer to this one. He was desperate for his teacher to choose him. Jack, Mr. Saller said, noticing him at last. The British and Americans bombed France for days to soften the Germans up, Jack said. They smashed the whole coast to pieces to make it easier for the Allies. Hundreds of people were killed. Germans, but the French people died too. Their houses were blown to pieces, but it was very good. That's enough detail. Thanks, Jack, Mr. Saller said, glancing at Cassandra Hemsani. Before Cassandra joined the school in September, Jack's class in 6B had a lesson where Mr. Saller explained that Cassandra was a refugee from Syria. Syria was an ancient country in the Middle East that had been suffering a civil war for years. Half of its population had been forced to leave the country to escape the danger on their own streets. Mr. Saller had warned them Cassandra might be very upset about what had happened in Syria, and he wanted them to be careful when they talked about D-Day because of that. But Jack tried again. He wanted to explain how French people had been brave and not talk about being victims. He doesn't want you to go on about it, Lucas whispered loudly to Jack so everyone in the class could hear. Then he turned round to look at the teacher. He's thinking about Cassandra and how she had to leave Syria and how her house was probably blown to pieces too, but that she's never told anyone anything about it, so no one knows for sure. I've asked Sir, but she... Lucas, Mr. Saller said. Do you want to stop, please? No, sir, Lucas said. I don't. Jack was Miss Khan tried to make eye contact with Lucas to warn him to be quiet. Well, I think you should stop, Lucas, said Mr. Saller. With Lucas' silence, Jack took his chance to explain. But the French wanted rid of the Germans even more than we did, Jack weighed in. If they had to deal with a few bombs falling in their back gardens, they'd take it. Idiot, Grace snapped. Yeah, think about it, Jack, Grace's friend Ella Smith added. Mr. Saller stepped forward with his hand up. All of 6A knew that this gesture meant stop talking, silence, listen to me. The whole class... Are you all right, Finn? You're very sleepy, aren't you? He is just tired, though, so don't worry. Anyway, where were we? Mr. Salah stepped forward with his hand up. The whole class did what was expected of them, and Mr. Salah waited for a few seconds. He's going to tell us off now, Lucas whispered loudly. A wave of laughter rippled around the room. Jack noticed that Cassandra was smiling too. No, Mr. Salah said, I'm not going to tell you off, Lucas. What we've got here is a disagreement. Can we agree on that at least? 6A said yes. Let's think about it, Mr. Salah said. Disagreeing is normal. We are all different. We all see the world in different ways. Some of us think war is exciting. Some of us think war is frightening. Some of us have never thought about it or talked about it before. But what we need to do is agree to disagree and always hear each other out. And not, Grace and Ella, call each other names. But Jack, Grace complained. But Jack what? Mr. Salah said. If Jack thinks it's okay that part of France was bombed so the rest of France could be liberated, then we have to listen. This is something that can happen in wartime. When people are killed by those who are actually on their own side, it's called collateral damage. Often it happens by accident, but sometimes a decision is made to strike a target even when there is a chance innocent people will be killed. Mr. Salah looked at Jack. But we have to hear Grace out too. Grace, tell Jack why you think what he said is wrong, but do it in a nice way, please. Grace looked at Cassandra, then shrugged at her teacher. She was reluctant to speak now. Mr. Salah lowered his head and sighed. I think we should leave it for today, he said. Soon we'll be heading for Normandy with 6B for our D-Day residential. We will be visiting inspiring places, including Pegasus Bridge, where British soldiers landed in gliders to take the Germans by surprise, and Omaha Beach, where American soldiers arrived on ships and waded out out of the waves, and finally to Ronville Cemetery, where many British dead were buried. So we have some more time to explore those issues. Mr. Salah surveyed 6A and said, that's kind of the point, you know, of us learning all this history and talking about it before we go to France, so we can really understand what happened in the Second World War and work out how we feel about it. The lesson was over. Jack grinned. He knew what he was going to do tonight. He was going to ask his dad about the places Mr. Salah had mentioned. Pegasus Bridge, Omaha Beach, Ronville Cemetery. He had written them down, even more excited about the trip now. So, those three places, if you want to look them up before you read chapter 6, Pegasus Bridge is Pegasus, then bridge. Omaha Beach is Omaha, then beach. And Ronville Cemetery is cemetery. Ronville is spelled Ranville. And that is the end of chapter 5. In the next one, Jack is going to take Finn for a walk. Anyway, thank you for listening. Finn is still... Oh, Finny. Still very tired, aren't you? Are you all right? We went for this big run on the hills and he's very sleepy, aren't you? That's okay. You can go back to sleep now. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening. And we'll see you with chapter 6.